June 14, 1942, El Alamein, Egypt. The scorching midday temperature had climbed to 122 degrees Fahrenheit as Lieutenant Geoffrey Simmons watched his British Crusader tank column slowly grind to a halt, one by one. Engines overheating in the merciless North African sun. 8 tanks down already, and more would follow soon. "We'll be back on the move within the hour, chaps," he assured his crew with a confidence he didn't feel. These machines are designed for this environment. Little did he know that 500 miles away, a single Royal Engineer with an unorthodox idea was about to change the entire course of the desert campaign. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the extraordinary tale of how a practical solution to engine overheating, dismissed as lunacy by senior military engineers, would transform the capabilities of Allied armor in North Africa, saving countless lives and ultimately helping turn the tide against Rommel's Afrika Korps. It reveals how sometimes the most profound military advantages come not from complex weapon systems, but from humble innovations born of necessity and applied engineering. The Western Desert in the summer of 1942 was an unforgiving battlefield unlike any other in World War II. While the grand strategists in London and Berlin moved pins across maps, the reality on the ground was dominated by a different enemy altogether, the desert itself. Temperature extremes ranged from 130 degrees Fahrenheit during the day to near freezing at night. Fine sand infiltrated everything: weapons, food, water supplies, and most critically, engine components. For the tank crews of the British 8th Army, these conditions created a maintenance nightmare that no training manual had prepared them for. Major William Harrigan, technical officer attached to the Royal Tank Regiment, scribbled furiously in his field journal as he surveyed the maintenance yard at the rear echelon base near Alexandria. 17 Crusaders and 23 Valentines awaiting repair. Primary issue: cooling system failures. Estimated 70% of all mechanical breakdowns related to overheating. Combat effectiveness severely compromised. He slammed the journal shut in frustration. The date was June 16, 1942, and the situation was becoming desperate. "The Germans don't seem to be having the same problems with their Panzer IIIs, observed Captain Morris, peering over a clipboard of maintenance reports. "Their operational readiness rates remain above 75%, while ours have dropped below 40. Harrigan nodded grimly. Their machines were designed and tested for the Russian steppes. Extreme conditions, but different ones. Our tanks were conceived for European battlefields, with moderate temperatures and reliable supply chains. We're asking them to function in an environment they were never meant to endure." The statistics told a devastating story. For every British tank destroyed by enemy fire, 3 more were abandoned due to mechanical failure, primarily overheating engines. The Crusader tank with its Nuffield Liberty engine was particularly vulnerable, losing cooling efficiency as sand clogged radiators and cooling fins. Temperatures inside the crew compartment routinely exceeded 140 degrees, pushing men to the limits of endurance. Tank commanders reported that crews could only operate effectively for 3 to 4 hours before heat exhaustion set in. Meanwhile, at a supply depot in Cairo, Captain Edward Thornton of the Royal Engineers paced nervously outside the office of Colonel Reginald Whitmore, Director of Mechanical Engineering for the Middle East Command. In his hands, Thornton clutched a folder containing drawings, calculations, and a proposal that he believed could solve the overheating crisis. At 34 years old, Thornton was not a career military man. Before the war, he had worked for Bristol Aeroplane Company designing cooling systems for high-performance aircraft engines. Now, he was about to propose something that flew in the face of conventional military engineering wisdom. "The Colonel will see you now, Captain," the adjutant announced, opening the door to the air-conditioned office. Colonel Whitmore did not look up from his papers as Thornton entered. A veteran of the First World War and a graduate of the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich, Whitmore embodied the conservative approach to military engineering that valued tradition and established practice. "I understand you have a proposal regarding our tank cooling problems, Captain," Whitmore said finally, still not making eye contact. "I hope it's more practical than the last 3 suggestions I've received. Some lieutenant actually proposed we operate only at night," He chuckled dismissively. "Sir, I believe I have a solution that could be implemented immediately with minimal resources," Thornton began, spreading his technical drawings across the desk. "It involves a secondary cooling circuit utilizing water evaporation principles, similar to what we've employed in certain aircraft engines, but adapted for tank use." Colonel Whitmore finally looked up, his expression skeptical. "Go on." Thornton explained his concept, a simple auxiliary cooling system that would circulate water through a secondary radiator mounted externally. The key innovation was a porous canvas shroud that would be kept wet, allowing evaporation to dramatically enhance cooling efficiency, a principle known as evaporative cooling. The design would bypass the standard cooling system without requiring any significant modifications to the tank's engine or existing components. In my calculations, this could reduce operating temperatures by 20 to 30%, even in extreme desert conditions, Thornton explained, pointing to his thermal analysis. And the materials required are minimal: copper tubing, canvas, basic pumps, and water. Everything we already have in abundance. Colonel Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Captain, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is frankly absurd. You're proposing we drape our tanks in wet blankets like some kind of Bedouin trick. These are sophisticated military machines, not desert camels." "With respect, sir, the principle is sound and proven in aircraft applications," Thornton insisted. "The physics of evaporative cooling—" "I'm well aware of the physics, Captain," Whitmore interrupted. "What you're overlooking is the practical reality of combat. Your system would require additional water, our most precious resource in the desert. It would add weight, complexity, and create new vulnerabilities. And most importantly, it would require modifying equipment in the field without proper testing or approval from the War Office." He shook his head firmly. "Request denied." Thornton stood his ground. "Sir, we're losing the equivalent of a tank regiment every week to mechanical failures. The Germans—" "That will be all, Captain," Colonel Whitmore said sharply, gathering the drawings and handing them back. "Return to your regular duties. This matter is closed." As Thornton left the headquarters building, his frustration was palpable. The temperature outside had climbed to 115 degrees, and in the distance, he could see mechanics working on yet another disabled Crusader tank, its engine compartment open like a patient on an operating table. "No luck with the old man, then?" asked Lieutenant James Harper, Thornton's assistant who had been waiting outside. "As expected," Thornton replied. His jaw set in determination. He called it an insane desert trick. Harper shook his head. "So that's it? Back to watching tanks break down one by one?" Thornton was silent for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Not exactly, James. Colonel Whitmore made it very clear that we can't officially modify any tanks." He emphasized the word officially with a meaningful look. "But he never explicitly ordered us not to conduct. Let's call it an unofficial field test." "You can't be serious," Harper said, eyes widening. "That's career suicide." "Perhaps," Thornton conceded. "But I didn't join this war to protect my career prospects. We have the components, we have the knowledge, and more importantly, we have access to one disabled Valentine that's scheduled for cannibalization tomorrow. One night's work should be enough to prove the concept." That evening, under the cover of darkness, Thornton, Harper, and 3 trusted mechanics began their unauthorized modification to a Valentine infantry tank that had been deemed beyond repair due to a cracked engine block. They had replaced the engine with another damaged one, functional enough for testing purposes, but considered unfit for combat. Working by flashlight with blackout restrictions in place, they fabricated a simple secondary cooling circuit using copper tubing salvaged from damaged radiators. They mounted a small auxiliary radiator on the rear deck of the tank, wrapped in layers of cotton canvas requisitioned from the quartermaster's stores. A small electric pump, borrowed from a water purification unit, would circulate coolant through this secondary system, while a gravity-fed water dripper would keep the canvas consistently damp. "This goes against everything they taught at Woolwich," muttered Sergeant Miller, one of the mechanics, as he helped secure the makeshift radiator. "But I've seen enough cooked engines to try anything at this point." By dawn, their work was complete. The modification was crude but functional, barely visible unless one knew exactly what to look for. Thornton wiped grease from his hands and surveyed their handiwork with cautious satisfaction. "Now we just need to arrange a proper test," he said, "preferably somewhere away from headquarters." Lieutenant Harper had already thought of this. The 2nd Armored Brigade is conducting mobility trials tomorrow at the training ground near El Hammam, 15 miles of continuous operation through sand dunes. Perfect conditions to demonstrate our system. "And how exactly do we get our unauthorized tank included in official trials?" Thornton asked. Harper grinned. "Let's just say I have a friend in the transport division who owes me a favor. As far as anyone needs to know, this Valentine is being delivered to the training grounds for parts salvage." The following day, as temperatures again climbed past 100 degrees, the modified Valentine tank was quietly integrated into the mobility trials. Major Stephen Reynolds, who was overseeing the exercise, was initially furious at the unexpected addition. "What in God's name is this tank doing here, Captain?" he demanded when Thornton approached him at the command post. "It's not on my manifest." "Special technical observation, sir," Thornton replied smoothly, producing forged orders that Harper had created. "Engineering Corps wants data on component deterioration under extended operation, Colonel Whitmore's initiative." He deliberately invoked Whitmore's name, gambling that Reynolds wouldn't risk questioning a direct superior. The gamble paid off. Reynolds studied the papers and nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but keep it at the rear of the formation, and if it breaks down, you're responsible for recovery." "Understood completely, sir," Thornton agreed, suppressing a smile. The mobility trial began at 0900 hours. 8 Valentine tanks and 5 Crusaders set out across the punishing terrain, a 15-mile circuit through sand dunes and rocky plateaus, designed to simulate combat conditions. Standard procedure called for 5-minute stops every hour to check engine temperatures and perform basic maintenance. Thornton and Harper followed the formation in a scout car, monitoring their modified Valentine from a distance. The tank was commanded by Sergeant Walter Briggs, one of the mechanics who had helped with the modifications and who had volunteered to operate the tank during the trial. "How's she running, Sergeant?" Thornton radioed after the first hour. "Like a bloody dream, sir," came Briggs' enthusiastic reply. "Engine temperature holding steady at 85 degrees Celsius. The other Valentines are already pushing 100 and reporting cooling issues." By the 3rd hour, the difference was impossible to ignore. 3 of the standard Valentines had already dropped out due to overheating, and 2 Crusaders were showing warning signs of imminent coolant loss. Meanwhile, the modified Valentine continued to operate at near optimal temperature. The damp canvas shroud doing its work as water evaporated in the intense heat. Major Reynolds couldn't help but notice. During the midday break, he approached the modified Valentine, where Sergeant Briggs was casually topping up the water reservoir for the evaporative system. "What's different about this tank, Sergeant?" Reynolds asked, eyeing the unusual configuration at the rear deck. "You've completed 3 hours of continuous operation without a temperature spike." Briggs glanced at Thornton, who nodded slightly, giving permission to explain. "Auxiliary cooling system, sir," Briggs explained proudly. "Captain Thornton's design uses evaporation through this canvas to pull heat away from a secondary radiator. Simple as can be, but effective as hell. Begging your pardon, sir." Reynolds circled the tank, examining the modification with growing interest. "And this was authorized by Colonel Whitmore?" There was an uncomfortable pause before Thornton stepped forward. "Not exactly authorized, sir. More of an informal field test." To their surprise, Reynolds broke into a broad smile. "Captain, I've lost 27 tanks to overheating in the past month alone. At this point, I'd paint the bloody things pink if it kept them running." He gestured to the remaining tanks where crews were frantically trying to cool overheated engines by any means possible. "Can you make more of these systems?" "With proper resources and official approval, we could modify every tank in the regiment within 2 weeks, Thornton replied, unable to hide his excitement. "Then you'll have both," Reynolds declared. "I'll speak to General McCreary myself. If this system performs for the remainder of the trial, I'll make sure you get whatever you need." The modified Valentine completed the entire 15-mile circuit without a single temperature warning, the only tank in the trial to do so. The demonstration was conclusive. Thornton's insane cooling hack worked. Word of the successful trial spread quickly through the ranks. Within 48 hours, Captain Thornton found himself summoned to the headquarters of Lieutenant General Neil Ritchie, commander of the 8th Army. He expected a reprimand for circumventing the chain of command. Instead, he found himself in a room with General Ritchie, General McCreary, and a chastened-looking Colonel Whitmore. "Captain Thornton," General Ritchie began, "I understand you've developed an unorthodox solution to our tank cooling problems." "Yes, sir," Thornton replied, standing rigidly at attention. "And you implemented this solution despite explicit disapproval from your commanding officer?" Thornton swallowed hard. "I did, sir." General Ritchie exchanged glances with McCreary, then continued. "Colonel Whitmore has recommended disciplinary action for your breach of protocol." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "However, General McCreary has pointed out that your solution, unconventional as it may be, has demonstrated remarkable effectiveness." Ritchie stood up and walked to a map of the Western Desert Campaign, mounted on the wall. "Captain, are you aware of our current strategic situation?" "In general terms, sir, Rommel's forces have pushed us back to the Gazala line, and we're at risk of losing Tobruk." "Indeed. And one of our greatest vulnerabilities has been the mechanical reliability of our armor. Your cooling system, if implemented across our tank regiments, could significantly alter the equation." He turned back to face Thornton. "Therefore, I am authorizing Project Oasis, effective immediately. You will have whatever resources you require to modify our tank force, beginning with the 7th Armored Division." Colonel Whitmore cleared his throat uncomfortably. "If I may, sir, while I admit the initial results are promising, I still have concerns about the long-term viability and combat effectiveness of this modification." "Your concerns are noted, Colonel," Ritchie replied coolly, "but we are fighting a war with the tools available to us now, not the perfect solutions that may arrive 6 months from now." He returned his attention to Thornton. "You have 3 weeks before our planned counteroffensive. How many tanks can you modify in that time?" Thornton did some quick mental calculations. "With adequate personnel and supplies, sir, we should be able to complete modifications on 200 tanks, prioritizing the Crusaders and Valentines that are most vulnerable to overheating." "You'll have everything you need," General Ritchie assured him. "And Captain, well done. Sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that break convention." Within days, Operation Oasis was in full swing. Workshop facilities in Alexandria, Cairo, and field depots across Egypt were repurposed for the modification program. Thornton assembled a team of engineers and mechanics, developing standardized kits that could be rapidly installed on different tank models. The basic principle remained the same: a secondary cooling circuit with an evaporative radiator, but the implementation was refined with each iteration. For the Crusader tanks, which suffered the most severe overheating issues, they developed an enhanced version that included a small wind-powered fan to increase airflow across the evaporative surface when the tank was moving. For the heavier Valentine infantry tanks, they created a larger reservoir system that could operate for up to 12 hours without refilling. As the modifications proceeded, the impact on operational readiness became impossible to ignore. Tank regiments reported that mechanical breakdown rates had dropped by 60%. Tanks that had previously been limited to 4 hours of operation could now run continuously for 8 to 10 hours, even in peak daytime temperatures. Major William Harrigan, who had documented the crisis in his journal weeks earlier, now found himself recording a remarkable turnaround. Evaporative cooling systems now installed on 87% of 7th Armored Division. Operational readiness rate increased to 73%, highest level since arrival in theater. Crews reporting significantly improved conditions inside tanks, with internal temperatures reduced by an average of 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The success of the program attracted attention from the highest levels. In early July, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, visiting Egypt to assess the situation firsthand, requested a briefing on the miracle cooling system that was transforming the operational capability of British armor. In a sweltering workshop in Cairo, Thornton demonstrated the system to the Prime Minister, explaining the principles in layman's terms. "So, Captain," Churchill said, puffing on his ever-present cigar, "you've essentially given our tanks the equivalent of a wet towel around the neck on a hot day?" Thornton smiled. "That's essentially correct, Prime Minister, Simple physics applied appropriately. Churchill nodded appreciatively. Sometimes the oldest tricks are the best ones. The Bedouin have used evaporative cooling for centuries. It seems our technical sophistication nearly blinded us to wisdom that desert dwellers have known for generations. But not everyone was convinced. Skepticism persisted among some traditional military engineers who viewed the modification as a stopgap measure at best, a dangerous field expedient at worst. Colonel Whitmore, though officially supportive of the program he now supervised, remained privately doubtful. "It's all well and good for training and movement," he remarked to his staff, "but what happens when these tanks enter actual combat? Will these external systems survive enemy fire? Will the additional water consumption prove problematic during extended operations?" These questions would soon be answered. On July 10, 1942, elements of the 7th Armored Division engaged Rommel's panzer formations near Tel El Isa. Among them were 127 British tanks equipped with Thornton's cooling system, facing their first true combat test. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Green commanded the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment during the engagement. In his after-action report, he wrote, "Crusader squadrons maintained combat effectiveness throughout 8 hours of continuous operation, in temperatures exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Previous engagements under similar conditions would have seen at least 30% of our force immobilized due to overheating. Today we lost only 7 tanks to mechanical issues, compared to 23 enemy tanks destroyed or disabled. The evaporative cooling system proved remarkably resilient to combat damage, with only 2 systems rendered inoperable by enemy fire, neither of which resulted in complete tank disability." The engagement at Tel El Isa was not decisive in itself, but it demonstrated that British armor could now match the Germans in sustained desert operations. The psychological impact on tank crews was equally significant. No longer did they need to fear their own equipment failing at crucial moments. This newfound reliability translated into increased aggression and confidence in combat. Sergeant Thomas Mackenzie, a Crusader commander, with the 3rd County of London Yeomanry, recorded in his personal diary, "Engaged enemy Panzer IIIs for over 5 hours today. In previous battles, we'd have been forced to withdraw after 2 hours due to overheating. The difference is extraordinary. We can now fight on equal terms with the Germans, pursuing when they retreat rather than limping back to our own lines with steaming engines. Morale among the crews has improved tremendously. We're no longer fighting 2 enemies, the Germans and our own unreliable machines." As July progressed into August, the modification program accelerated. Thornton's team refined the design further, incorporating feedback from frontline units. One significant improvement came from an unexpected source. Sergeant James Wilson, a former auto mechanic from Manchester, suggested adding a simple filtration system to the water intake, preventing sand contamination that had been reducing efficiency in some units. By mid-August, over 400 British tanks had been modified. The impact extended beyond combat effectiveness to logistics and maintenance. Tank regiments reported a 45% reduction in required engine replacements and a 60% decrease in radiator repairs. This translated into significant savings in spare parts, maintenance hours, and transport requirements. The Germans, meanwhile, began to notice the change in British capabilities. Intercepted communications revealed growing concern among panzer commanders about the increased endurance of British armor. A captured German intelligence assessment dated August 20th noted, "British tank units now demonstrating unprecedented operational persistence. Previously exploitable tendency toward mechanical failure appears to have been largely corrected through unknown modifications." Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself noted the shift in his personal papers. "The English have somehow overcome the chronic unreliability of their tanks in desert conditions. We can no longer count on their machines failing before their men do. This changes our tactical calculations significantly." The culmination of Project Oasis came during the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942. Under General Bernard Montgomery, the 8th Army launched a massive offensive against Rommel's positions, with over 700 tanks participating in the initial assault. Of these, more than 500 were equipped with Thornton's cooling system. The battle lasted for 12 days of intense combat. Throughout this period, British armour maintained an operational readiness rate of over 70%, a figure that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. The ability to keep tanks running continuously through day and night operations proved crucial to breaking through the German defences. In his official history of the battle, General Montgomery acknowledged the importance of the cooling modification. The improved mechanical reliability of our armour proved to be a decisive factor. Where previously we might have expected to lose one-third of our tank force to mechanical failure during sustained operations, at El Alamein this figure was reduced to less than 10%. This allowed us to maintain continuous pressure on enemy positions, a key element in our eventual breakthrough. For Captain Edward Thornton, now promoted to Major, the battle represented the vindication of his unorthodox approach. Standing amid the workshop at the massive tank depot near Alexandria in November, he watched with satisfaction as yet another regiment of tanks was prepared for the advance into Libya, each one equipped with his cooling system. Lieutenant Harper, now a captain himself, joined him with a stack of production reports. 683 tanks modified to date, he announced proudly. The workshop in Cairo just completed their 100th conversion this week. Thornton nodded, a tired smile crossing his face. And to think Colonel Whitmore called it an insane desert trick. Speaking of the Colonel, Harper said with a grin, have you heard? He's been putting himself forward as the primary architect of the cooling system in his reports to the War Office. Apparently, he recognized the potential of evaporative technology and authorized its rapid development. Thornton laughed. Of course he has. And honestly, James, let him have the credit if he wants it. What matters is that the tanks keep running. As they walked through the workshop, a group of tank crews newly arrived from England were receiving instruction on the maintenance of the cooling systems. The contrast between these fresh-faced newcomers and the veteran desert crews was striking. The veterans treated the evaporative systems with almost reverent care, understanding their crucial importance, while the new arrivals regarded them with curiosity and some skepticism. Looks like a bloody moonshine still strapped to the back, one young crewman remarked, examining the copper tubing and canvas shroud. A weathered sergeant from the 7th Armoured Division overheard the comment. Show some respect, lad. That moonshine still is the difference between driving into battle and being towed back with a seized engine. Out here, water in that reservoir is more precious than the fuel in your tanks. By December 1942, as the 8th Army pursued the retreating Afrika Korps across Libya, Thornton's cooling system had become standard equipment on virtually every British tank in the North African theatre. The War Office officially designated it the Auxiliary Evaporative Cooling System Mark Fern, but to the men who operated the tanks, it was simply known as Thornton's trick, or sometimes the lifesaver. The impact of this seemingly simple modification extended far beyond mechanical reliability. By keeping engines at optimal operating temperatures, fuel efficiency improved by 15 to 20%, extending the operational range of tank formations. Reduced internal temperatures meant crews remained effective longer, making better tactical decisions and maintaining combat effectiveness throughout extended engagements. The ripple effects continued to logistics and supply chains. With fewer tanks breaking down, recovery vehicles could be repurposed for other duties. Maintenance units spent less time replacing damaged engines and cooling systems, allowing more rapid repairs of battle damage. Perhaps most significantly, the production demands for replacement engines decreased dramatically, allowing factories in Britain to focus on producing new tanks rather than replacement parts. Military historians would later identify Thornton's cooling system as one of several critical technical innovations that helped turn the tide in North Africa. While not as dramatic as new tank designs or more powerful guns, the humble evaporative cooler addressed a fundamental weakness that had plagued British armoured operations since the beginning of the Desert Campaign. In his comprehensive analysis of the North African campaign published in 1967, historian Professor Richard Hargreaves wrote, "The so-called Thornton system represents a perfect case study in battlefield innovation. It emerged not from formal research and development channels, but from the practical experience of an engineer who recognized a critical need and applied existing principles in a novel way." That it was initially rejected by traditional military engineering speaks to the institutional resistance to unorthodox solutions, even in the face of clear operational deficiencies. For the tank crews who fought in the scorching desert from El Alamein to Tunisia, the impact was more personal. Staff Sergeant William Parker of the Royal Tank Regiment, who served throughout the campaign, later recalled, "Before Thornton's cooling system, we lived in constant fear of our engines overheating. You'd be advancing toward enemy positions, knowing you were just as likely to be stopped by your own radiator boiling over as by German shells. Afterward, that fear was gone. It gave us confidence that our machines would carry us through the fight, no matter how hot it got or how long the battle lasted. In war, that kind of confidence is priceless." Edward Thornton remained with the 8th Army through the remainder of the North African campaign, continuing to refine his system and develop other practical solutions to the challenges of desert warfare. After the Allied victory in Tunisia in May 1943, he was awarded the Military Cross for his contributions to the campaign, with his citation specifically noting the exceptional technical innovation that significantly enhanced the combat effectiveness of British armoured forces. After the war, Thornton returned to civilian engineering, joining Rolls-Royce's Aero Engine Division, where he continued to work on cooling systems for high-performance aircraft. The principles of his desert cooling hack found applications in various industrial and automotive settings, particularly in regions with extreme heat conditions. The full extent of the system's impact only became clear years later, when military analysts gained access to German records. Field Marshal Rommel had identified the sudden improvement in British tank reliability as one of several critical factors that ultimately led to his defeat at El Alamein. In his post-war assessment, he wrote, "Beginning in August 1942, we observed a marked change in British armoured capabilities. Tanks that previously withdrew after brief engagements due to mechanical limitations now maintained combat operations for extended periods. This negated one of our most significant advantages and allowed the enemy to fully leverage their numerical superiority. Today, modern military vehicles operating in desert environments still utilize variations of Thornton's approach, combining sophisticated electronic controls with the same fundamental principles of evaporative cooling that have served desert dwellers for centuries." The story stands as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most effective innovations are not about creating entirely new technologies, but about applying existing principles in clever and unexpected ways. In the vast narrative of World War II, with its epic battles and world-changing technologies, the story of a simple cooling hack might seem insignificant. Yet for the men who fought in the merciless desert, where the environment was often as deadly as the enemy, this unassuming innovation made all the difference. It transformed vulnerable machines into reliable weapons and gave Allied forces the endurance they needed to drive the Axis powers from North Africa. As Lieutenant Jeffrey Simmons, who watched his tank column falter in the opening of our story, wrote in a letter home in November 1942, "We've pushed Rommel back over 500 miles now, and through it all, our tanks have kept running. It's strange to think that something as simple as a canvas water jacket could make such a difference in this war, but without it, I doubt I would be writing to you today. Sometimes the smallest innovations save the most lives." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.